We have Butakami, who has been with us waiting for a number of days, not just a few minutes and hours, because he is part of the planning of today's events. Mr. Kami is also part of the archives, and he serves as an official on the archives. He will tell you a bit more of exactly what it is he does there. But Mr. Kami is, number one, a foodie. He reports on food, and I must still go and visit some of those places. Formerly, Mr. Kamedien does all sorts of research and has written and co-written many biographies and has published many works. So I am really interested in listening to what Butakami has to say today. And I'm going to ask Butakami, because I've called him Butakami for so many years, to ask just to give us his official name. Butakami.
Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. At last, I can be here, and as I've told Thelma, pre-stage nervousness, so I just hope all my butterflies in my tummy will fly in information. I've been asked to talk about what happens to heirlooms, to cultural artifacts, and to heritage objects after anyone, including private family papers, after whoever is the possessor of that passes away. It is an issue that is close to my heart. I am a member of the Western Cape Archives Advisory Committee, which is a provincial statutory body. So I represent the Cape Family Research Forum, which is a registered genealogy NPO. So for the past 20 years, we have focused on bringing the concept of archives to the community, because we are doing family research or genealogy. Then in our second decade, we started to do capacity training or what I would call skills transfer, and that is where we take members from the community from all sections on a regular basis to train them in what is available at the archives if you intend to do your own family tree. So those archival resources within the archives, we give exposure to the archives, but most important, how to navigate your way once you enter the archives. Then, since it's this year, it's our 20th anniversary in existence. Right here in this particular school hall, we told ourselves for the next 10 years we need to look at digitalization, because digitalization is the new trend and the new wave for all organizations that are institutions of memory, the archives, the libraries, and the museums. So in a nutshell, I'm speaking here in my capacity as a representative of the Cape Family Research Forum, who is also partner to WCAAC for today's event. So I've prepared a few slides to raise awareness amongst all of us in the community, and that is, once valuable papers in our hands and once family heirlooms and anything of heritage significance in our homes, what happens to that once we passed away? It's not a very nice topic, thinking this gloomy idea but definitely with certainty we will pass away, and our surviving members of our family will be confronted with what happens to what we have acquired as possessions. I know in my family, all the books that I've bought over the years for slave history, they only tolerate those books while I'm alive. I know within 24 hours, they all supporters of CAFDA charity shop. And I'm sure that truck will, within 24 hours, will come and collect all my books that I've accumulated for slave history. So that I'm very much aware my books are only tolerated while I'm around. Okay, so my first slide is the happy scenario for family heirlooms is normally it gets passed on or inherited by surviving members of your family from the deceased person. The worst scenario, which few of us have ever been exposed to, or we don't want to think about such a scenario, is that those very family heirlooms or heritage objects or cultural artifacts may leave the family's possession and ownership and space that has been in the family for generations due to something that few of us ever consider. And that is the winding up of an estate. And in Long Street, Afrikaner second-hand bookshops, I asked them, how do you get all these books that are in mint condition, that are collector's items, which are normally called Afrikaner, published in South Africa? And one bookseller told me, now you see what happens if a professor dies or anybody else with an extensive home library. Once he dies, it becomes part of his estate, and eventually it goes on public auction, and on that basis, these books in mint condition ends up on our shelves to be sold to the next generation of readers and hobbyists. So the key aspect that happens exiting, where we lose control over our family heirlooms of sentimental value, is that it ends up on a public auction, and most important, to offset death duties. I don't know anything about death duties. I haven't been confronted by such a situation, so it's merely theoretical. Let me ask for the next slide, where I want to focus on heirlooms, cultural artifacts, and heritage objects. What is meant by a family heirloom? On Google, it says something has been in the family for generations, and this is very crucial. For generations, it's not just something that you bought, but it has been in the family for several generations. Sometimes it's of low economic value, but at all times, whatever the value, it always has sentimental value. That is the close association between your family and these heirlooms that you have inherited. Another definition of Longman Dictionary says a valuable object that has been owned by a family for many years, again linking up with generations, and passed on from older members of the family to younger members. Another definition from Wikipedia is also passed down from generations to the current family members. Again, belong to the family for several generations, and now it is in the hands of the current custodians or stewards of that particular object. If I can ask our operator. Then there is another scenario that all these objects, because they I'll get to the fourth paragraph. Not just buildings which are 60 years old, but any family heirloom of cultural significance or heritage significance which carries heritage value enjoys the same protection under the National Heritage Resources Act. This is a fact that is actually unknown to most of us, that any objects in our possession that are over 60 years cannot just simply, as the first sentence says, these heirlooms cannot simply be packed into a container when the family resettles overseas and moves with that container filled with household contents to their new home. If I can take you to the next one, unfortunately, it is not so simple. The South African Heritage Authority have a permanent office, which is called the Heritage Office, whereby intended expats or immigrants and anyone else for that matter must apply for export permits. And this is very crucial because all these objects falls under this legislation. The movement of these objects are prescribed. You don't have freedom of movement and freedom of association just because it is in your family's hands. So we normally find in newspapers that in London at art auctions, a painting or any other valuable object coming from South Africa is being placed on the public auction, and the next moment the South African embassy will go to that auctioneer and ask for that particular item to be removed from the program for that particular public auction. And the reason for that is not because the South African embassy wants to involve themselves in public auctions. They compelled to, because the Heritage Objects Office, they are the custodians to an oversight bureaucracy in South Africa, and they will notify Foreign Affairs, and Foreign Affairs instead will have to assign our ambassador or his representatives like the cultural attaché to go to that London auctioneer to point out to him, we don't have any record of this object that have left South Africa's shores. So this is one of the reasons why we have this legislation automatically taking care of the South African estate. Can we go to the next slide? One way that all of us ends up with these objects that are not really known to all of us is that genealogy has been popularized by TV worldwide, and our genealogical and family history investigations ends up with us accumulating lots of possessions that have close association with the history of the family, and these objects become then very significant. The one unexpected or unintended consequence is that after we have put our family tree together, we end up with an family archive or an unofficial family museum in our possession. And the result is we as genealogists and family historians becomes now citizen archivists and citizen curators of family museums. And family museum can be as simple as a family album. We think of the family album as just something in a box, but actually because of its heritage significance, it becomes a family archive or a family museum. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? The disadvantage of having a family museum or a family archive, for want of a better word, is that in our community, we never had community archives. We never in our community had a place for the safekeeping of all these material objects or material culture. So these heritage objects and cultural artifacts is immediately at risk because if there's a fire in your house, all these unique papers that you have in your family may end up in fire. And then most important, our family story remains in private circulation. Our family's contribution to the community and to society just stays within our own family. And the reason for that is, apart from our community's history and our family histories being marginalized in the past, because we come from a previously marginalized community, is that our story never gets mainstreamed, never get into the newspapers, never get into school textbooks for history, or for that matter, any other school project, because these objects are not in museums, they are not in government archives, and they are not curated objects. Like for instance, here in our meeting we have the Kuverji displays, etc., and others, meaning that all these heirlooms, if they were in a museum, they would have been properly researched, there would have been a proper write-up, there would be a display explaining the context and background of why this particular object is of importance to the public at large. But because we all amateur archivists and amateur curators, these objects are uncurated without giving it a background or a history. It's at the moment all basically standalone objects. Like for instance, Mr. Kuverji was able to explain to us why that particular bicycle is here on display. Right? We were fortunate that he was able to guide us why that object is here today as that particular bicycle. The next slide. As I said, our stories never get mainstream because our objects are not within museums and libraries and archives, all these government institutions or state places of safekeeping. Now I just giving you a quick guideline. Formal museums and archives here in Cape Town, for instance, the Western Cape Archives have various collections that they have within their management. The National Library, as you will see, also have numerous collections, and it includes the Grey collection, the Destiny, the Sicilian collection. UCT, for instance, have vast ones. Ezekiel also there. It's just to demonstrate to you, if you can just move to the next slide. As you can see, these formal institutions of memory, they have all these collections, and the bottom line is all these institutions came into being because they receive private collections. That is how these collections are now part of the public memory of South Africa and the national story. Can we proceed to the next one? Then, as I said, when we have a family archive, there is a disconnect between our family archive and the government archive, or the family museum and the government museum. However, we're able to bridge that by means of donating special collections. And I want to bring to your attention that there are members in our community over decades that have donated their family heirlooms and private papers. So at UCT, the private family papers of the late Richard Dudley, the well-respected Livingston High School educationist, is safely in the hands of the UCT Special Libraries collection. So here we already have a family in our community that although the person has passed on, they have placed it in the safe custody of UCT libraries. Next one, when myself and Abdul Dayan, it will speak after me, when we were preparing for the planning of the archives workshop, the lady at the archives was very generous to share with us that the late Ahmad Davids have deposited his private manuscript papers of his book, The Cape Muslim Afrikaans, or the Afrikaans of the Cape Muslims. He have deposited that safely at the archives in Rowland Street. Then lastly, the National Library of South Africa Special Collections, the most recent one during COVID that I know of, is that one of our colleagues, Nazrin Sali, on behalf of her family, donated her father's private papers to the National Library. And the reason for that was that he had a very senior position in Saro Rugby. He was the rugby sports manager. So all the papers that he, press clippings and diaries and whatever that he have kept over the years, their family all then agreed to put it for safekeeping at the National Library. Final. Okay, and can I have the next slide? Yeah, just what is important for having these documents outside our homes, because we will reduce the risk. One is ease of access for any family members and anyone else that needs to have access to those papers. These museums and archives, they got specialist staff for collection management, etc. And then lastly, can we move to another two? Yeah, in summary, central location, security infrastructure, then conservation. They have specialist staff that provide conservation of these objects, especially paper-based documents that can deteriorate over time. And then most important, all these institutions nowadays have digitalization departments, and as the National Library Special Collections lady said to me during this week, is your family can keep what you have, but what happens if it gets destroyed by means of fire or it gets lost along the way if you move between one place and another? So all they ask, you can keep your curated objects, but please allow them to make a preservation copy or to have a preservation copy, so that which they now call for a duplicate copy, which is preservation. Lastly, my family have a 200-year Quran, a handwritten Quran in our family. And our family is also confronted by this very two concepts. Must it be left in the family archive, or must it be safely donated and transferred to one of these state institutions of safekeeping, be it a special collections library or a special collection at one of the museums? But this is a real issue that we face, and it's not just my own family, but several families have handwritten Qurans in their possession for generations. So in a nutshell, must it remain an enigma as a family heirloom and as an uncatalogued heritage object? Will we forever as a community be puzzled by this unresolved question? Who penned these Cape Qurans and how old are they in terms of dating and age of paper? Are these Qurans, are they presumed to be more than 300 years old? Meaning, were they brought to our shores from Indonesia? Or are they merely 200 years old? Meaning that they were penned and written during the time of Tuan Guru. And because it is not incorporated into these institutional repositories. It is not available for academic researchers from across the globe who can deal and give us as a family and others with the same heirlooms the answer. Were they brought into the country or were they penned here as South African Afrikaner? And then lastly, I want to leave you with a last statement. In 1681, the Raja of Tambora was brought into South Africa, and he wrote the first Quran from memory on the farm Vergelegen. We in South Africa have no idea what happened to this missing Quran. All we know is the Quran of Twanguru, which is in Dorp Street on display, because that one has entered the public domain. But this one is still in private circulation if it has survived the fire that happened at Vergelegen. Because when Adrian van der Stel was expelled from South Africa, Vergelegen farm was by the VOC authorities burned to the ground. However, the folklore within our community is that this Quran is still in circulation in Cape Town, and the possibility that it is right here in Wynberg cannot be excluded. I thank you.
Okay, Dr. Mogamat Kamedien, we say a huge shukran to you for what you have expounded to us. I just want to say to you, your books are still on your shelf. My books are already in the box. They're just waiting for the day. So many of my items are in the box. So, but shukran for that. Shukran Dr. Kamedien, and we just going to take a photograph. And on behalf of the Wynberg East Civic Association, we have our award, and you are also part of the organization of the day, so the award is from yourself to yourself. Shukran jazilan.